Welcome to Cover Book Meet. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. Our guest today is a former motorcycle rider and sports car driver who says he has, quote, lived a life of exploration, marrying, divorcing, and chasing after understanding. That includes 3 decades in book manufacturing, serving from frontline supervisor to vice president of operations, followed by a decade as a pastoral associate at a local church, performing multiple functions. He also has a master's in theology from the University of Scranton and lived and worked in 4 states, including New Hampshire, where he says, quote, people are independent, farsighted, and usually happy. And New Hampshire just happens to be the setting for his book, Love, Pride, and Murder. We're very pleased to welcome Dennis Feece. Good morning.
Good morning, Roger. How are you?
Great. Despite the other jobs over the years, were you always going to be a writer?
Well, I can't really read what fate has in mind usually, but it was never my intention to be a full-time writer, certainly. I just sort of stumbled into it. I've written all my life in various ways for various things at different times. And I've even attempted novels occasionally. I have one that's been published. The one that we're reviewing today is the second, and I have a third one that's now with the publisher. So it all kind of happened within the last few years.
Okay, because I will tell you that Love, Pride, and Murder does not feel like a first book at all. I've done a lot of first book authors, and this is very, very comfortable. In fact, you told it in first person style, which is usually a tougher way to write. Why that choice for you?
I think it has a more intimate feel,
Mhm.
and the idea for the reader is to, or at least for me as a reader, is to get into the mindset of the author in some extent. I don't mean, try to anticipate what the author is going to do necessarily, but I let the story take care of that. But just to have a sense that we're in the same place when I'm reading the book, and it's more difficult to do that if the author has used the typical 3,000-foot perspective where everything is sort of visible and pops up here and there. If it's first person, then you're following it the same way it's written, and I think that makes it more interesting.
It does. It does. What's intriguing to me is that your hero, Thomas Bradley Stone, who goes by TB, is a local private investigator. He's nothing like Dashiell Hammett or Mickey Spillane's hard-boiled. In fact, he's probably the opposite of hard-boiled.
Uh, yeah, that was intentional. I mean, I love those books. I think that Raymond Chandler was a genius.
Mhm.
I think he's overlooked as just a writer. I mean, a wonderful writer. Forget about the genre, but Dashiell Hammett not quite as much, but certainly falls into that category to some extent. So I love that. I love that kind of mystery writing, and I think it's. Let me think. There are a couple of writers today that do something that's similar to it. Um, you remember the Spencer series of novels?
Mhm.
It took place in Boston. I'm trying to think of Robert Parker. Robert
Yeah,
Parker
yeah.
was the other. He writes very much the way Chandler does, not quite as intricately as Chandler, but
Mhm.
and of course the time period is different. But he has the same sense of what the private investigator is all about. He's a little more sociable than Chandler's characters, but still it sort of resonates in the same way. So I love that kind of writing. I love that kind of genre. However, I didn't want to sort of follow everyone else because a lot of people have imitated that. And I think today, if you take a survey of most of the mysteries that have been written, they fall into a couple of different categories. One is the very sanguine serial killer type, and the villains are really sort of like Bond characters. I mean, they're
Mhm.
stretched to the point where it's hard to even believe them. And the other at the other end of the spectrum is the cozy mystery, where you have usually it's someone who's not a detective, not a police person of any sort, but just stumbles across a mystery and has a particular flair for it. And the novels are typically written around whatever it is that person does for a living or does in respect to the it sort of counters the mystery. And those are good, but again, like the sleuth type mysteries that came out of the 30s, uh, there's so many of them that it's hard to find any place to squeeze in. So I figured, well, I write something that is somewhere in between
Mhm.
and is unique in that sense. And so I hope I've done that.
Oh, absolutely, you have. And I think one of the interesting things about TV is he is more intuitive. And I want to quote a sentence here that you wrote. He says, I didn't have to rely on my intuition or even rational synthesis to provide aha moments. I just kept my subconscious unbridled and let it mingle with my conscious experience. And voila, an inspired conclusion sprung fully formed. Weird, huh? So there's a little bit of breaking the fourth wall there, but it's a
That's right.
wonderful explanation. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's stretching it just a bit, I think,
Mhm.
but I wanted to overstate that. I had some feedback from someone who did a written review, um, and she said that seemed to be an intrusion. That he would go off the main character would go off on these tangents that didn't seem to fit with the story. Well, I think it was a good review. I mean, it wasn't a bad review at all, but that little piece of it, I don't think it was understood. I don't think it was
Mhm.
completely understood. It sounds to me like you may have gotten what I was trying to do.
Oh, yeah, and I think that actually adds to it from my perspective as a reader, as somebody who's read
Great.
a lot in the genre. But I
Yeah.
also like the fact that you play homage to the classics in the setup because it opens with a beautiful woman consulting a
Yeah.
private detective.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's a nod about to the 1930s writers. Yeah.
yeah, and we should explain that the reason she's there is because she's concerned that the supposed car accident that killed her fiance was not an accident at all. So
Mhm.
I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but I want to give the general background so if people is interested in it. It really, eh, okay, I have to make a comment about this because I was talking to my wife this morning about the book, and I said, it has an unusual what I call texture, for want of a better word. And you use the word cozy, but I used it as like slipping on an old cozy, comfortable sweater. It is a very rare thing, particularly in this genre. So and it flows. It flows beautifully. Just I,
Thank you.
I read it in two sittings. That's how for once it flowed. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like you enjoyed the book, and that's really all I've ever been trying to do. As I started writing, it's um, the 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 characters are drawn in such a way that you can identify with them.
Mhm.
And I have enough, I think, in there. So many different characters in there that almost anyone can identify with one of them, if
Mhm.
not all of them.
Yeah.
So that's I think if there's, this is my perspective. It's the readers who make those decisions ultimately, but from my perspective, that's what I was intending to do. I wanted to draw out the characters as completely as possible. Again, I go back to the idea of writing in the first person. In that way, we meet people, we learn to know people, we understand people, we say goodbye to people. That's what our life is all about, everyone's. And you do it from within yourself. I mean, you don't have there's no one out there's not like the Greek theater. There's no one out there that's telling you what's going on.
Mhm.
You have to sort of learn as you go. And where people are concerned and getting to know people, if you're writing it in the first person, then you as the writer, the storyteller, can explain how you got to know this person, why you know this person, and how this person reacts to you, and how you react to that person. And that I think strengthens the character development.
And it's interesting because you, as the reader, know things just and discover things just as your character does as well. So there's no,
Absolutely true.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I have to comment also. It's the very first murder mystery I ever read that managed to include a discussion of Kierkegaard and Hegel involved in it.
Yeah. Well, that is those are my interests,
Mhm.
and I wanted to put something in there that was just sort of self-serving, and I tried to do that. As you mentioned, I have a master's in theology, so Kierkegaard is doesn't exactly fall into a Catholic sort of perspective, but more existential, I think. But
Yeah.
I just like the way he writes, and I like the way he lived, and just one of those interesting characters that have popped up over the years. And so it was, and I wanted to put something in there that maybe would appeal to a different audience as well.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I want to note there are a lot of cultural touch points mentioned in here. And I want to, because I'm an old disc jockey, I want to mention that I recognize the Grateful Dead St. Stephen, Bob Marley's Who the Cap Fits. You also
Yeah.
quoted T.S. Eliot's A Little Gidding, and you
Yeah.
referenced both Etta James and David Carradine's TV show Kung Fu. All of them integrated seamlessly in the story, and not to mention Walking in the Light from the Gospel of John. So
Yeah.
there's a lot
That's,
there for people. There's a lot of
uh,
what we call Easter eggs in there, but they don't interrupt the story. I mean, I've had people that interrupt the story to give you 6 paragraphs on something, and this is just kind of by the way as you slide by it. So well done.
that's, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That was very intentional and in exactly that fashion.
Mhm.
How many times have you read something where you have a sermon, and
In the
usually
middle.
and if you know it's a sermon, then that's okay because that's what you're looking for. But you're not really looking for it when you're reading something that's escapism. Mystery is intended to be entertaining primarily,
Yeah,
and if you can learn something along the way, that's great. But the main thing is to be entertained.
yeah.
That's it's escapism, really, isn't
It is, and also I have to mention, listening to Turandot or Turandot if you're Italian,
it?
particularly Nessun Dorma, which is an amazing piece. And of course, now it's stuck in my head all day. So thank you for that.
That's my ringtone.
Is it really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that piece.
That's a, is there a chance that there would be more about TB in the future?
Yeah, the one that's at the publisher now is the second in the series, and I intend to do at least three. And if people read the books, then I'll do more. But the three will make up there's a sort of overall theme that I think having the three of them will complete. The second one picks up where the first leaves off. So all the characters and a couple of new people are introduced, but all the same characters are sort of developed a little bit further. But the nice thing about a second one I found is that the characters are already there. I don't have to create them. So
Mm,
they're already living, out there in the, whatever that is beyond your own head. And so all I have to do is extend what it is that they've already been doing in the first novel. And hopefully I've done that. And also it's a way of completing some of those threads, that always kind of go
mhm.
through a novel and you wonder, well, I wonder what happened there and I wonder what happened.
Yeah.
And they're not all red herring. Some of them are, but they're not
Mhm.
all that. They're not just props for the mystery, but
Yeah.
that's where the next novel comes in. So I complete some of those threads and I introduce some new ones for the
Okay.
third
I'm
novel.
I'm hoping one of them is romantic in nature because
It
romance
is.
does spring in this one.
Yeah, yeah, it is. You'll be happy to know.
Uh, I also have to say you make New Hampshire sound really attractive. I'm sure that the Chamber of Commerce for the state will be very happy with what you've written there.
Do you know the state?
I don't. I've never been there, but
Oh, is that right?
I'm in Oregon. But
Yeah,
people,
different side.
yeah.
Well, I've been to Oregon. I had the friend who attended what is it, Oregon State? Is that
There's Oregon
the
State
big
and
school?
University of. So yeah,
Yeah, it was Oregon State
yeah.
in Eugene. Is that the one that's in
No, that's the
Eugene?
University of Oregon in Eugene.
Okay, well then
Yeah,
that's what he attended. Yeah,
yeah.
and he and his wife had just moved out there. They had just married, and I was this will sound odd, but I was between wives at that time. Anyway, I had some vacation time accrued, and so I took off and spent a few weeks out there and enjoyed
Hmm.
the state. I liked Oregon very much.
Well,
It was
I can tell that the upstate New Hampshire sounds pretty interesting as well. So
it is. It's a great place. If circumstances hadn't dictated otherwise, I'd still be there. I love the
yeah,
state.
yeah.
Love the people. I love the state. I loved everything about it. Um, it is, I think I mentioned to somebody else a while back that going to New Hampshire, when I was working in New Hampshire, I worked in Hanover, which is where Dartmouth is located, and I lived a little further down, a little place called New London. It's sort of halfway
Hmm.
between Manchester and Hanover. And so every day I would drive, I'd commute. It was about 45 minutes. But
Hmm.
commuting in New Hampshire from where I live to Hanover isn't like commuting from Lancaster in southern Pennsylvania to Philly. That's just traffic, and it's just you're worried about hitting somebody or being hit by
Yeah,
somebody.
yeah.
But in New Hampshire, it's not that way at all. You're lucky if you see another car. I mean,
Hmm.
going all the way up. So it's a very thinly populated. Once you get up past the Massachusetts border, it's very thinly populated. So where I lived, we lived on a nice little lake where the kids love that. And every morning I'd get up and get in my car and I'd head up. And as I was leaving where we lived, there was like a little hill, and I got on the main highway. And as I drove out, we were back by the lake, and I'd leave early in the morning. In the wintertime, it was dark most of the way to work, but I would always see some kind of wildlife. It could be a moose, it could be deer, it could be whatever. I mean, there was always something out. Um, and so it was like being 100 years in the past. And then I get on the
Mm.
highway and I go to civilization. So it was like living in two different worlds in the same place. So yeah, I loved New Hampshire. I loved
Interesting, because it almost feels like TB lives in his own world at a certain extent because of all the stuff he does mentally.
it. Yeah, well, I drew TB to be that kind of a person. You read the book, so you know that
Mm.
there is a backstory, and that
Yeah.
is sort of explored as the novel progresses. But it all has a role. I mean, it isn't just there, to provide some kind of color for the character. It's there because there's a reason for it in the novel, and so the loner aspect. In fact, I think since I've written the second one, they kind of blend, in my
Yeah.
head. But there's some dialogue between Lucia and TB at one point where she's kidding him about being a cowboy. That probably wasn't in the one that you read. I think it's in the
No, it
second.
wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's in the second one. So I'm disclosing something from second novel here for you. But she's
Uh,
kidding him about they're walking and she's kidding him about being. He makes a comment, and she says she's imagining him as a cowboy, and uh, she says, I think she says lonesome cowboy, and and he says, me a loner? No, you can't be serious. And then she pinches him or does something to point out that he's being sarcastic with her,
yeah.
and then the dialogue goes on for there. I don't want to give any more away than that, but yeah, he is a loner, and he's a loner, sort of in the cast of a Raymond Chandler character. Think of
Mhm.
Philip Marlowe without the alcohol, or at least not without the hard alcohol that
Yeah.
made Philip Marlowe so endearing. But yeah, he was a different kind of character, but he certainly was a loner. And
Mhm.
a lot of the private eyes that from literature are loners. I mean, that's just sort of part of who they are and why they get into that business. So making him a loner, but he's a sociable loner. I mean, the way he goes about solving the mystery is to engage his friends, people he meets along the way, and so in the end, they end up working as a team to accomplish,
Mhm.
to find the solution to the mystery.
Yeah, I was gonna in my head I described it as a connected floater.
A connected loner. That's good. Yeah.
So it's
If I can, I'll use that.
yeah, it's all yours. I file the serial numbers off, it all belongs to you. Um,
Thank you.
there's some really fun little bits and pieces in here, and I happen to love this one, and I'm going to quote again. I can blithely point to all human behavior being a consequence of some previous event, human or otherwise, but that gets way too messy for a guy like me. Determinism, free will, trying to reconcile the two in reality or even perception. Thank you for that. It's so much fun to run into a little piece on determinism and free will in a detective story.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of what I wrote was just fun. I mean, it was firm or tongue firmly planted in cheek.
Hmm.
It was in order to do that. But yeah, my undergraduate degree was in psychology, and I
Ah,
almost went in that direction in life, but I didn't. So you know, you'll find some young, you'll find some, you'll find, the sort of armchair psychology like what you just read,
hmm.
and also a tinge of philosophy that's taught in philosophy 101, granted, but still.
Hey, it's kind of nice to be reminded of that from time to time. I
Good.
have this weird question that I sometimes ask authors, but
Those are the best kind.
if, I mean, you've already cast this in your head when they option it for the movies, who's going to play TB?
Oh, that I've done a bunch of these interviews lately, and that's the first time anyone's asked that
Oh,
question.
well,
So I never had to think about that. Who would I cast as TB? Wow. I'm not sure I can give you an answer on that.
Okay.
I'm too old to play him myself,
Yeah.
so
You'd
that's
be
out.
perfect. I can tell right now you'd be perfect for the spot.
Yeah,
But it's an intriguing thought. Sometimes I play with that and see how what you've written matches the persona or what you think an actor, because of course an actor could disappear into the role, doesn't have to have their own persona. But
true.
I'm thinking of somebody on the mellow side of life.
Who was the guy? Who was the guy? Actually, somebody does pop into my mind. Who was the guy that? Um, oh boy, I'm stretching here to get a connection. I can't think of his name. He did it. He did a really wonderful performance working with. Um, uh, it was a mentally handicapped. What's the name of the movie? The something about pineapples or
hmm,
I don't know. It was a story of a mentally challenged individual who uh, wanted nothing more than to be free of all the encumbrances that he'd been unfortunately given, and he stumbles across this sort of wild-eyed rebel. And the gentleman that plays the wild-eyed rebel is the one I'm thinking of. It may not sound like the right connection, but it really is because he's a guy that operates within his head. He's a guy who is sensitive to what's going on around him. He has just enough distance in the way he handles himself that you're never really sure what's going on with him. And he portrays that beautifully. And that's the kind of character. Pineapple Express. That's it.
okay. All right.
Pineapple Express.
I was
Great,
going to say
great
if we
movie.
have to look it up later, I'll put it online when we do the post production. But pineapple was
It's a
okay.
great movie, and that character, not, I mean, obviously the character is very different, but the actor I think could do a good job. So I gave you an answer.
All right, and we'll put the actor's name up in post production so people can know who to look for.
Great.
This is an unusual way to deal with it, but hey, that's the way we do it. Um, I have a feeling you really enjoy writing. I have the picture of you
Oh yeah.
sitting at the keyboard, giggling from time to time or smiling and go, oh yeah, that's great.
I don't do a lot of giggling, but smiling definitely. Yeah. It's and it's more than that. I will think about what I'm going to be doing as I'm writing it, but I don't plan it exactly. I let the writing kind of do that. But as I'm doing something else, something will pop into my head, and I will jot it down because I want to incorporate it into what I'm writing. And I do enjoy it. I enjoy thinking about it. I enjoy just doing it.
Mm.
When people, the the old the old saw about the novelist who has writer's block. Um, he's suffering. He has to get half drunk before he can write anything. All of this stuff about writers, I you know I don't think of myself as a writer, but I've certainly never had any problem with that. It's always been fun. I just enjoy writing. I like linking words together and just trying to make some sense out of it. And then, as you said, I like to put a little bit of humor in, just
Mhm.
enough to sort of keep it from getting stale.
It's the mustard in the sandwich, is what it
There
is.
you go. That's
Yeah,
exactly it. Yep.
yeah. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Say that again, please.
I'm sorry. Are you a plotter or a pantser? In other words, do you plot or you write by the seat of your pants?
Pantser. uh, I do a little bit of both, but probably more the latter than the former.
Hmm.
It's because once I have an idea going into whatever it is I'm writing, if, like for a novel, this particular novel, it was a scriptural passage in Genesis 4, 1 through 16. And it was a kernel of an idea. It's something that has always interested me, that particular passage. And it's simple. You read it, and there's a beginning to the passage, there's the end of the passage, and there's a message, and it's clear. But it really isn't clear. I mean, if you dig into it, try to unpack it from all the different things that you can find take all the different things you can find from it. It gets very complicated, and then you know you. So I was thinking about that one day, and um, there was a confluence of ideas. Okay, if that resonates, and
It does.
so it came together, and that was the beginning of the novel, and the timing was exactly right, and I mean, you have ideas about novels, or at least I do, or have had many times, and I'll jot something down. And I'll think, someday I'm going to have to get to that, and it never happens. But in this particular case, thanks to the pandemic, I had plenty of time and plenty of motivation, and I did it. So
It's interesting because this is something I'm discovering is a lot of authors said, this is it. I've got my chance. I got my time. I'm
yeah,
home and I'll just use it properly and come up with something to be proud of at the end of it. And I think you can certainly be proud of this one.
thank you.
Where I'm when people write series, and I ask them this question, usually I said, do you have the last scene of the last book in the series in your head when you start?
The short answer is no.
Uh-huh.
Um, the long answer is a little more complicated than that. I mean, there are some general ideas. As I mentioned earlier, the I have in mind three novels that will have a sort of theme that will hold them together, and I've kept that in the back of my head with the second novel that's now with the publisher, and I'm already thinking about the third one, how that will begin. And again, I didn't know what the ending exactly was going to be with this novel, with Love, Pride, and Murder. Same thing with the second novel. As I got into it, and it seemed to be going in a particular direction, and the closer it got to solving the crime, and actually there's more than one, but as I got closer to that end point, I could envision what it was I wanted to how I wanted it to end. But beyond that, is if I don't know if that qualifies as plotting it. I don't think so. I think it's
Yeah.
more like getting on your bike or getting in your car and heading west or heading north or heading east or heading just see what you find.
Okay. Fascinating stuff. Again, is there any aspect of your writing or this book that we have not talked about that you want to make sure the audience knows about?
Oh, I mean, I could go on forever.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, let me put it a different way. This may helpful.
okay,
When they put down and close the book and put down, what do you hope they take away from it?
okay. Well, I hope that what they get is a sense of when you finish a book, like you, I'm a reader and I love mysteries. And when I finish one, and typically I read book. I don't read the digital form. I read print. Um, I'll look at the cover. I'll look at the back cover. I'll kind of hold it for a minute. And if it was a good book, if it was a really good book, something I really enjoyed, I'll smile and I'll set it aside and I'll think about it. And I'll think about it favorably, usually. Um, and the characters, typically one that I really enjoy, has characters that are memorable, and so they stay with me for a while, not forever, but for a while. And a really good one I'll go back to a couple of times. In fact,
Mhm.
I was just telling a friend of mine that I'm about to pick up a book that we have in common that we both enjoy. For me, it's like the fifth time I've read it, and every time I read it, I've read it, years beyond the first time and the second time and the third time, so that not only is the book is the same, of course, but I've changed enough that reading it that second or third or fourth, whatever time, there's something I see that I didn't see before because my head wasn't or my heart
Mhm.
wasn't large enough to pick it up before. And so I'm looking forward to reading this one again. It was one of those books that sort of had some kind of an impact on me because of what I was dealing with at the time.
Mhm.
And there isn't any, and that I don't want to make that sound too grim because that's not what I meant, but just something that was in my life that hadn't been there before and that I was, working through or enjoying or whatever.
Mhm.
And so this book is sort of like a touchstone.
Can you share
Well,
that, what it is?
yeah, it's the Magus. I don't know whether you're familiar with it or not.
I don't know that one. Sorry.
Um, it it's unique.
Okay.
Um, it was written by an English author in the late 50s, and his name is John Fowles, if that name means anything. There was a movie not too long ago that was made called The French Lieutenant's Woman. Does that ring a
Okay.
bell?
That
He
rings a bell.
he wrote the novel. It was a good novel. The Magus was his second novel, and he was a young man when he wrote it, and a lot of it was autobiographical. But he was experimenting with, I think he probably read some James Joyce and that sort of
stream of consciousness stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. I think there were, and that's exactly what the influence was, at least for Joyce. In his case, there was some of that. He talks about Jung, in interviews that he did. He was influenced by that, and there was some postmodern stuff in it, which also was in Joyce and in his writing. And I think with Fowles' work, he was a young guy, so he had all sorts of things that he was experimenting with in life that, when you get to be a little bit older, a lot of that stuff sort of goes away. You don't really take it seriously. And it's just as well. I mean, at least in my case.
Probably. I hear you there. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's pretty fascinating. We all have cases of experienced the phenomenon, like the very first time your wife gets to be pregnant, and all of a sudden all you see are baby things everywhere you look.
Yeah, exactly right.
Being sensitized to whatever is going on in your life around you.
There you go. Exactly.
Great. You have a website?
I do. It's called Author, Critic, and Stuff. But it's a website that is not in flux necessarily. You can use it. You can ask questions. You can do all kinds of things, but it's not sophisticated. I'm not a tech guy, so it's be patient. I'm working on it now. A lot of they're very tricky. You go from page to page, and you have things that explode, and you have all this stuff on these websites, and it's nothing like that. There's a little blog that's attached that is woefully short of having too many things written, just because I haven't had the time to do it. But it's there, and if you want to ask questions, if anyone wants to ask questions, then they can certainly do so.
Okay. Are you doing any book touring?
Not just some local stuff, book clubs and that kind of thing, but no.
Okay, I would say if you ever get to Oregon, you have to look me up. That's all there is to it.
It's a promise.
All right. Is there anything again that I haven't touched on you want to make sure gets out to people?
I don't think so. I think that it, we've talked about philosophy and psychology and theology and all this stuff, and there's a little bit of it in there, but the main thing is it's a mystery. And if you like mysteries, then I think you're going to enjoy it. That's all. That's the main point I want to get across. It was written so that people would see it, be intrigued maybe by the title, and once they get into it, then they can't put it down. And that's what I was hoping for. A lot of folks that I've talked to have said that that's the case. So
I will testify again that is absolutely what you've succeeded at. And thank you so much for that. Our guest today has been Dennis Feece. The book is Love, Pride, and Murder. Give it the highest possible recommendation. This is the good stuff. Thanks so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Take care, Roger.